Hello, good afternoon everyone. This is the first event of the Panodyssey Café. My name is Ruff Orsolya. I'm editor-in-chief of the Könyves Magazin. And our guest of this afternoon is Irodalom, editor-in-chief, cultural organizer and lecturer, and Danube and our topic of today will be Danube literature. But before we go in, for those who are not so familiar with the Panodyssey Café project, please let me read out a couple of sentences of the project. So, Panodyssey is an international social media network dedicated to creative writing. The main aim of it is to create a platform where the users can directly share their content and even monetize it. Panodyssey offers a platform for publication both for the writers of fictional or non-fictional text, whether they established journalists or amateur short story writers. Aside from connecting the writers with the readers, they also encourage users to freely collaborate and to form their own community based on their topics of interest. The project focuses on the creators, therefore priority will be given to ethical questions such as intellectual property. The project started in France, and it is the Creative European Alliance Consortium main task to create awareness over Panodyssey in other areas of Europe. The project is supported by the Creative Europe program, the Creative Innovation Lab. So that is the project, but our topic of today is the Danube literature, which I think is a very broad concept. And before we go into detail, I think you are very familiar with it. This has been written by and originally it has been published in 1990. The title is and I found the sentence and I thought it could be a very good starting point for our conversation today. And the sentence is the following. What constitutes the Danube is for me to decide. For those who like the music of the native language in Hungarian, it says, with me others stay on Duna. And it leads to my first question, because I think for us, living in a city that is filled by the river, it's not so evident that the Danube is here in our city. But I'm really wondering about your personal Danube image. So I would suggest to start with a personal touch. What is your personal Danube image? Either really a personal, emotional one, or a lingering or more. The floor is yours.
Okay. I always look for evidence that we have in the middle of our city. And I was wondering when I was in Vienna first time how small the Danube is. And it's that Amazon is also conversation. And we enjoy cruising by the bridges or with ships. So it's also a place for family.
I was very fortunate boy because I was born in the 5th district, into the 5th district, and I was on the street which leads to Danube, and actually I had a view of the Danube from my window as a kid, so it was really evident, but it was really something that I'm accustomed to, and it was hard to let go. So as I think of it now, I always seek to be close to the Danube. For example, during the pandemic, I again rented an apartment which had the view of the Danube. So, of
course, it's a privilege, and not everyone can afford that. But I think it really just suits the soul somehow to watch the river, and that's why a lot of people go on the, I don't know how to call it in English. Actually, there's the famous poem of Attila József by the Danube, and I checked how they translated rakodó part alsó kövén, because I was wondering what's the English
What
word.
is the English?
And it's really, I don't think it's very accurate. On the bottom step that from the wharf descends. So it's like, they probably don't even have the word. So it's like the docking bay or something. Yeah, it's.
I'm really glad that you quoted Attila József, because my second reference is actually his poem, what you mentioned, by the Danube, that was written in 1936, I think. And there is a line in this poem, and I will quote it as well, and it goes the following: "As if my heart had been its very source, troubled wise was the Danube, mighty force." And I like it very much. It's a beautiful, beautiful picture, really. And not only because it describes the complex nature of the Danube, but also because it puts its source into the heart. And my next question is the following: do you agree with the view that the Danube has a special place in the literary heart or literary mind of Hungarian writers and poets?
Yeah, my second thought was Endre Ady, and he has more poems about the Danube, and one which is quoted very often, I don't know the translation at the moment, Dunának oltnak egy a hangja. So that means that the Danube is not just ours. So many countries have their national rivers, like the Germans, the Rhine, and the Czech, the Moldau, and the Danube is a cross-border river. It's really a European river. It's connecting west to the east, and in a certain sense also the north to the south with the Balkans. So I think it's important to see the parallelities, the similarities, and differences, and collective memories, and also conflicting memories of these countries. And this is what our poets are also writing about.
What do you think about it? Is there any special place in the Hungarian literature for the Danube?
Well, there certainly is. We could mention many authors that wrote about the Danube. My latest experience is the new novel of Péter Nádas, and at the end there's this amazing Danube scene, which is very shocking. It's about a disabled boy in a wheelchair by the Danube. I'm not going to tell you the story because it's just really shocking. You need to read it. But one of our important poets who passed away recently, János Térai, he wrote a sequence sort of the Danube when there was the flood. When was the flood? 1990. I can't remember exactly when that was, but it's called Árvízi Stancák, and I really liked that sequence of poems. But we could go on and on. So I think there is maybe another thing that shocked me in translation was Jókai Mór's Aranyemberi Hungarian. Do you know how they translated it into English?
No.
The Man with the Golden Touch. I would have never guessed. That
It's another big Danube
It's another
novel.
big Danube novel. And also, there's an author that we can, for some reason, we used to consider Hungarian. He's not, Jules Verne, Verne Gyula. I don't know why we started to...
His name is translated into
Hungarian.
so
People
it's
started to
quite
think
funny.
that he was Hungarian. And there's a Dunai hajós.
I
the
wanted
pilot
to
of the
make a
Danube.
film about it when I was a child. Yes,
Oh,
I
really?
thought
The
that
pilot of the
yeah,
Danube, yeah. Yeah.
But what could be those features or characteristics that make the Danube such an inspiration or muse for, not even for the Hungarians, but also for those authors in the region? You already mentioned that it also connects a lot of authors along the river and in the region. But could you articulate somehow? Is there any characteristics or features that's really so could be highlighted if we talk about Danube literature as such?
I think when we say Danube literature, one possibility is to look for texts which are thematizing the Danube as a river. Floods is also a common topic, or also historical events. But when I think of Danube literature, I think of the literature of the Danube region. So Danube as a big cultural region. And it can be characterized with its multilingualism as well. So there are strong literature, many parallelities, but we can only realize these parallelities, similarities, if we have translations from the literature of each other.
It's a very, very important topic, and we will discuss it a little bit later. But I'm really wondering if we could speak about common Danube heritage. What I mean that if we talk about Danube region, we couldn't forget that there is a strong historical connection as well. Let me just mention the Austro-Hungarian monarchy. So could we find some common points if we talk about Danube literature? It's just a myth, and there is no reality. So there are only separated Danube literature, or can we at all speak about a big common Danube literature?
I can only understand it in that way, that the literature of this region reflecting on some common topics.
And are they in dialogue with each other? How do you see it?
It depends on us. So
Really?
I think
In which sense?
I mean, we have to bring these texts into dialogue, and for this, there are several forms of cultural exchange, and I think this is what my life was about. So I brought some documents to show this, but I was editing a European Cultural Journal, the Hungarian edition of it, Lettre Internationale, and the main idea of it was that the big intellectuals, thinkers and writers and scientists of Europe in the 17th century used to share their ideas via letters. So this is Lettre Internationale, and it was a journal to bring these texts together and to create dialogue between texts. And now I think the era of printed journals is more or less over, and this new project is also about the question how to bring these texts into dialogue in the cybersphere, in the online sphere. And I have also been part of project where we tried this.
Those who are following us via the internet cannot see, but there is plenty of books and booklets beside you. Please just tell me or show us some of
You
them.
can talk about it and I show them.
Okay.
Thank you. So there was a colleague of mine, the publisher of one of the publishers, the projekt, Zsuzsa Botiszki, who had this problem. She wanted to show poems like we were quoting right now from József Attila about the Danube to friends, but there was no right form for this. So she started the project which was called Babel Matrix because she was a mathematician by profession. And this is an online initiative which still exists, and I'm still using it. And it brings European literature pieces, texts in original languages and different translations. And one form of this was the magic cube of Visegrad. This was a common project of us that we made with the Visegrad 4 countries. We have selected with translators and literary experts 10 texts from the classic, 10 from the modern, and 10 from the contemporary authors, and put it online. And we also made a CD of it. That was this period. And there you can find the text in the original language, in the other V4 languages, in German and English, because we need a normal language for the communication. But this way you can also find the original one.
I think that you pointed out to a very, very important aspect, because here now we are talking in Budapest, and our literature is very rich but very small in comparison to the others, and our language is very rich but also very small. And for small languages like the Hungarian, it's always a challenge to find the platforms or the forums to show itself. And what could be those platforms in your experiences? Where can a small language like Hungarian to show itself to the world?
I think we have to put ourselves into a context, and the Visegrad countries, and with the help of the Visegrad Fund, was a good context. I worked a lot in this area, and two more things I would like to show here. I mentioned literary journals and anthologies. This is another possibility. And there was another initiative started from Szeged, from the southern part of Hungary, by a literary journal actually, with the title Insula Vicina. So thinking that we have strong literatures in the neighboring countries, but these are islands. And there were literary experts, editors, who edited, I think, 7 of these anthologies from the neighboring countries.
Which countries are represented here?
What I brought is the Slovakian one, because we work very strongly together, but it started with an Austrian edition. And there was Croat and Serbian and Slovenian, and the last one, what we just presented this year, is the Romanian one. So the Danube countries, you can say. And I will mention it now that we are close, getting to the end to a project which is called the Danube Bridges. And it is based on readings and discussions at the Danube, about the Danube, and it's based on the cooperation of Austrian, Slovakian, and Hungarian partners. And one of the very important partners from Slovakia is an initiative called Aquafon. And it is also based on Danube bridges. There used to be a bridge about the Danube between Esztergom, the northern city of Hungary, and Parkány, a southern town or little town from the Slovakian side. And it is a festival about the Danube. It's from 2006 on, it's going on every summer, because this bridge, as many bridges above the Danube, was destroyed. And in the years when those who were living on both sides of the river couldn't communicate, they used to communicate over the river. And now
shouting over the river.
Yeah, and this festival is organized by someone who is from this place but lives in Switzerland, Karol Frühoff, and he's inviting every year a German-speaking or a Slovakian or a Hungarian author to write a text which is read from both sides of the river. It's very beautiful, and
it's such a beautiful metaphor, actually.
Yes.
The bridge, but also communicating over the river.
And with the help of texts and translations and music. So it was part of our project. And there was another important initiative, I will finish soon, which this team actually was part of it. It was called Dunapest, and it was an all-genre artistic festival by the Danube. And we were part of it with a literary event, and there were readings on ships. And now there's a place where I work with them. It's called Három Holló. It's a cultural cafe on the Elizabeth Bridge at the Danube already. And we continued this initiative with an event called Duna Fest. And and this was part of our project, and we invite writers from the Danube countries. And one thing what is important I wanted to mention here as sort of a method how to mediate between our literatures. The translators and literary critics are important, but it's important that well-known Hungarian writers introduce the unknown writers from the neighboring countries, and this is what we did here as well. Yeah, I stop at the moment.
So there are also very useful initiatives like the one I'm taking part of right now called Versopolis, which is also an exchange of authors and poems and translators, and of course the one we're participating at the moment, Panodyssey, which encourages translation much and has a certain amount of funding for it, which is very important to be able to pay the translators and not having to work for free, which we usually do. So yes, and I must mention the wonderful work of people working in Pest text. Actually, there are many anthologies coming out. This doesn't have to do anything with the Danube, but an American poetry anthology just came out. But there are also Spanish ones, and so many. There's a constant dialogue between the countries. So,
Eva, you mentioned Visegrad countries, which there is a political field of the Visegrad countries which became a bit loosened up, let me put it in this way. But what about the cultural field? It is still a lively cooperation field between the Visegrad countries?
Certainly, very much. And we didn't mention, for the Danube region, you mentioned the Austro-Hungarian monarchy. The German name for it is Duna monarchy. So that it's
still
really,
an extra.
Yeah, it's really a part of it. And Central Europe, Mitteleuropa. So this is also a label for the Danube region. And you mentioned if there is funding behind these initiatives, and there are many projects for cooperation on the European Union level. But there is another thing which is called the Danube strategy, which is not understood on a cultural level, but there are initiatives. The Danube cluster, it is coordinated by Márton Méhes from Vienna, and there is a European Danube Academy in Ulm, and so this is also a possibility. What this our little Danube Bridges project is funded by this European Danube Academy. They started to make projects which are easy to handle also for smaller initiatives, and they are also focusing on European cultural capitals in the Danube countries. And I remember another project which was made by Halma, a network of literary houses along the Danube, and they rented a big boat, and there were some writers and translators invited from the boat, and it started from the Black Sea and it went up, and we took part at events in Budapest and also in Bratislava, in Vienna. So I think the Danube region is offering plenty of possibilities for literary exchange as well.
It's funny that you mentioned all those big cities like Ulm and Bratislava, Budapest, Vienna, because sometimes one might have the impression that Danube literature is very much city-themed literature. Do you agree with it, that on the one hand, the river leaves its mark very much on the city life, but if in the other way around, we could also say that the literature is also very much, maybe because of that, a bit city emphasized. So the emphasis is very much on the city. That's how we see the river in the city, like in Budapest or Bratislava or Ulm, etc. So how do you see it? Is it a city literature?
I wouldn't say this, although I didn't mention Novi Sad, which is and Belgrade, and which are also important cities. But I think now it's time to mention this anthology.
It's a German edition.
The original edition was a German edition, and a very interesting initiative. It was made by Germanists. One is Edith Király, Hungarian, but she lives in Vienna, but teaches in Hungary, and Olivia Spiridon, who is from Hermannstadt, Sibiu, but lives in Tübingen. And in Tübingen there is a Donauschwaben Institute. There's an institute for the Danube Germans, and they organize seminars for the Germanist students who are studying German language and literature, and these seminars are organized along the Danube. One was in Kisorosi, which is important from our literature also, because Mircea Miklós lives there, and then the Cucurelli, and the book of Nádas, the latest one you mentioned, is also taking place there. They had a seminar there, and they were reading and analyzing texts about the Danube, and they were regarding texts as rivers, and it was such a successful experience. They are doing it since several years already, that they published an anthology based on this, and this anthology was translated this year into Serbian language in Novi Sad, and it was published in Hungarian right now, this year. And they are not handling the text about the Danube just starting from the Schwarzwald and going back, but along different topics. And one of the topics is what you were just asking now, if the cities, so that if the Danube is connecting cities like Buda and Pest, in the case of Budapest, or And cities are always more cosmopolitan, multi-ethnic, multilingual, and more open to modern trends. So this is one aspect, but they have also certain chapters about fishes and fishing and floods and many other things. So there are many aspects you can approach these topics, and I think the Danube is a metaphor for time, as we have it in our József Attila poems.
Time and timelessness,
but it's also it brings the past and its present and also the future, also the modernization of there were dump boats, I don't know, gőzhajók, hogy mondják, Danube, but and regulation. So Danube is also a symbol. Yeah, also a symbol of man and nature, and the flood as well, and it's also for history. Yeah, so our history is sometimes very conflicting historical memories, but it's also around the Danube. So Danube is everything as you started.
Actually, sometimes I'm wondering if those several layers and symbols, whether they are easily understandable for those who are not familiar with the Danube as much as we are. So is it easy to understand for someone who lives, I don't know, in England or wherever where there is no Danube experience?
There is a very interesting author, Esther Kinski. She participated in one of our last Danube fests, and she wrote about the Danube, but she also wrote a book with the title The River, about the Thames in London. So I think there are similar experiences, also the water and the flora around it, and how people live, and there are many things. So I think literature is about generating empathy and making it possible for an English person to imagine how it is living at the Danube. So I think that's what it's about.
There's a funny fact that a Brazilian writer called Chico Buarque, I don't know exactly how to pronounce his name, but he wrote a novel entitled Budapest. And I think he has never been to Budapest. He just imagines a travel through Budapest, and he writes about the Danube. But I think he just read some books about it and probably looked at the map and just imagined. So even people who don't live here, they have an image in their head about the Danube.
Or there's an attraction, maybe.
Yeah.
I think that all of us are in a bit in a privileged position since we are dealing with texts, and I know that it's not easy to judge, but how do you see, are we familiar with the literature of the other Danube countries? How do you see, is there an interest in Hungary, for example, for the literature of those countries? Translation is the key, I think, in that aspect. So how do you see the situation of translation in this sense?
It depends on the languages.
On the country,
because from Austria, the most important texts were translated.
Okay.
And in the last decade, there is a very strong cooperation between Slovakia and Hungary and literature. And here I would like to mention the fact, what we didn't mention yet, that outside the border of Hungary, there are Hungarian people living, and there is very strong literature in these regions, and the people, the writers and the literary people are very important in this mediation, in the translation, because they live in two languages and two cultures. They also have concept for this transculturalism, and there is a strong mutual reception of each other's literature, but it also depends on the funding, and there is a good period for this right now, and there is an organization I would like to mention. It is called Bázis, and this is a literary and artistic association of Hungarians in Slovakia, and they we cooperated with them in this our Danube project, but they were organizing Slovakia as guest country at the last book festival. Book festivals are also very important. So we can say you started with a personal question, and we can say that personal connections are also very important. So good networks and projects which bring good partners together, they help. And I think as last publication, this Hungarian edition of this Danube anthology will certainly help to bring the literature of the Danube countries closer to the Hungarian readers.
I agree with you about the network, but we shouldn't forget that grants and supporting schemes are also very, very important. Now we are in a crisis situation, so how do you see, could it affect in any way the translation supporting programs that now we are in a very difficult times and difficult situations? So how do you see? Are you pessimistic or more optimistic?
I belong to the people who have a biological optimism, as it is called. So
Great to hear.
I'm in a good mood, even if I have no reason to be in. But I think that the networks and the funding system, they don't react so quickly.
Okay.
So we are speaking about the end of the Gutenberg era, and there are still books coming out, but it's important in the case of journals, for example, to exist in printed form and in online form. And I think that the online platforms are offering a huge possibility, even in case of not much money.
They are offering a great possibility, but for some reason, the dialogue between certain countries, especially the Anglo-American world and Hungary, which again doesn't have to do anything with the Danube, but I think it decreased a little bit.
Really?
You know, yeah, compared to not only Hungary and the Anglo-Saxon world, but you know, we could be much more active in this sense.
On the state level, you mean?
Also on the state level, but also on the personal level. I mean, I went to the London Book Fair, and I found out that the yearly books that English-speaking people read, only 3% of the total that they read is translation. So poetry in translation is even less. You know, it's like 0.0% something. So very, very little. And compared to us, you know, who are, you know, just feeding on books from abroad. So it's again, Hungary is a small country and it's a small language. So we are. We translate a lot, but it's not common in the global West. Well, Germany and Austria has always been paying attention to Hungary, but outside of this region, not so much.
I would like to comment on this. So I think the people in the English-speaking world think that everything is written, can be read in English. So they don't really need translation. It is the problem. I know European Literary Network, so there are a few people who are still engaged and try to work in this regard. But Danube is again something which help us to be part part of a bigger cultural space, because it's exactly the German and the Austrians who have some also historical connection with this region, who have interest and who translate a lot. And actually what is translated from the East European, Central European region into German, that will be translated into Dutch and maybe into Scandinavian languages. So actually German is the lingua franca from this point
It's
of
like
view.
a gate.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes, because
bridge.
they are all
Bridge, yes.
yeah, because they have maybe also some sort of a nostalgia, because there were the German Ost, so there were many Germans living in the Central and East European region. They have a literature from this territory, and I think you can really use the Danube also as a metaphor for this, the German-speaking Danube countries, and we, the rest, yeah, the West and the rest. It's connected by the Danube, and it's good to use this space as a cultural space for exchanges.
I deeply agree with you, because I always had the impression that Danube as a topic is it like a literary entrance ticket. So it just opens up so this mental doors. So
Then there are some sensitivities
yes,
and
that's
openness
right.
for it.
So, but do you agree that
Yes,
means?
absolutely.
Yes. You mentioned a lot of cultural exchange programs, but I'm really interested. What about the theater? Because I know that you work a lot for theaters. Do you have any such similar experiences in that field?
Well, we have certain directors that work abroad, especially the middle generation, Arpad Schilling and Victor Bodó and Cornel Mundruczo, so and Csaba Polgár and many more, and so yes, they work abroad frequently. But as for literary funding, as for theater funding, also in Hungary, is very problematic at the moment. So we don't have many opportunities actually to.
Yeah, there are festivals, but how to get there? Yes.
Yeah, there are festivals, but how to get there? I mean, only these big directors, those big names that are well known abroad already, can go and get into the so-called festival carousel, to get on it and go to different festivals.
And then we return to the personal network again.
Yes, and also these are artists who do not live in Hungary anymore. So they do represent Hungary in a certain sense, but in another sense they don't. And it's their personal choice, but it's very understandable because there weren't many possibilities.
But beside the personal connections, what could help to promote this kind of a opening, let me put in this way, either in literature or in the
There
theater?
should be like state funding, of course, and there should
Programs,
be
you mean?
programs, and well, not only it's. We don't want to talk about politics here, but it's very problematic at the moment. I mean, who gets funding? What kind of funding they get? It's theaters that don't.
Yeah, then there are theater events, and it's a political gesture if you participate or not.
There's Mitem. It's like a huge festival, theater festival in the National Theater in Budapest, and it's actually very high quality. There's a lot of money in it, and I think it's very high quality. But some artists boycott it. They don't go. They refuse to participate because of political reasons, and that is also understandable. So it's very hard to get into this blood circulation of the European theater world, so to say.
we started this conversation with an Esterházy quotation, and we are coming to an end. And I would like to quote one more from the lines of Countess Han. And it's a sentence, and it goes the following: "The Danube is not something, not the water, not the molecules, not the dangerous currents, but the totality. The Danube is the form." And my interpretation is really it's also about the complexity of the river, but also it is about the network of literary texts. And you already mentioned that there is a new anthology that had been published recently in Hungary, and I really like the subtitle. The title is "The River," the subtitle, "The Different Kind of Danube Anthology," which raises the questions in me: is there any new we can say about the Danube? Or is it just a form, or is it just a perspective that gives new aspect to the Danube literature? I don't know if you have any answer or not, but I really would like to read out, because you wrote a text from this anthology, and maybe we could think about the answer right after the conversation. So I really don't like to answer it right now, but I would like to ask you to, as a final act, to read out this small extract from the anthology, "The River."
Yeah, it is a text written by Jana Beňová, who is a European Literary Prize winning author, and the title is "Enter." Migration, emigration, tourism. Crowds of people, especially in summer, people from different countries, nomads, wander through the popular places, the cities, towns, hills, and lakes. They bring nothing, contribute nothing, but they all want to take something home, at least an experience. Hannibal ante portas. From my point of view, what differentiates tourism from migration is time. Tourists jump from their homes to airports, then from airports to hotels, from one known place to another, like frantic squirrels. Sometimes I see them in the evening, exhausted from sightseeing in the streets of my town, hopeless, blind, like bats. The town moves them from one place to another like chess pieces. And like those pieces, the tourists don't set the rules. After the Russian invasion of 1968, my country, Slovakia, regressed back to old-fashioned communist rules and closed our borders. Citizens were not permitted to leave. A rabbit trap, a queda, a pitfall, maybe a blind set, a hidden trap on a familiar path would be the best comparison. Migration, which I see as a semi-permanent move, a move you can return from, was no longer possible. Only emigration, to leave and never return. To step through the Iron Curtain meant never coming home again, at least to a home that was not prison. The president of Socialist Czechoslovakia said, "Enough is enough, our borders are not a promenade." This sentence stayed on people's minds for generations. In Bratislava, capital of Slovakia, only 60 kilometers from Vienna, capital of Austria, people would stand on the bridge crossing the Danube and look at the hills and castle in Hainburg, the town closest to the Slovak-Austrian border and 15 kilometers from Bratislava. Elderly people told stories to the youth about the tram which in the past connected those two cities. Romantic stories that to those youth must have had a hint of science fiction to them. They were so unbelievable. Now, when I ride my bike from Bratislava to Hainburg, simply following the river, I often think about the president of Czechoslovakia and his efforts to control the borders, and by passing the place where the border had been, without any interruption or stop, I stick my tongue out of him. Yes, borders are a promenade, made to walk, ride, fly, or swim through. I have heard stories about people from Bratislava who left the country and ended up, for example, in Canada. But when homesickness struck, they would travel to Hainburg, climb Braunsberg Hill, and look from there at Bratislava Castle. It was as far as they could go. Still, the best feature, maybe the only good feature of the Iron Curtain, was its transparency. People who had left could still return home with their eyes. Now, when Hainburg has become the destination of my trips, my walks and bike rides, who am I there? A tourist, a migrant, an emigrant? I am simply me. The country is what changes, the border migrating into my own land. My first migration took me to the United States. I visited my uncle and his family and lived with them for 3 months. It was my first time so far away for any length of time, alone with my parents or my friends. I read Dostoevsky, Crime and Punishment, and took care of my 3-year-old cousin. He and I learned English together. I was a bit lonesome, but it made me focus on myself. When I look back now, I think it was a time of great change for me, 16 years old in a completely foreign country, and I believe it is having that time and circumstance for personal change and development that also differentiates tourism from migration. Time to travel and discover. Do some sightseeing on the inside. Explore the inner life. Inside, to find the rivers and notice the backwaters. To see the nice views, but also awkward and pretentious places. To walk in, not just around. Enter.
Thank you very much. As for my last question, I have to admit that we have a lot to say still about the Danube, so I think we are full of Danube stories. So thank you very much for your contribution and for your participation, and thank you for the attention.